Good evening. You've arrived at a quiet space meant for rest. There's nothing you need to do here. Nothing you need to solve, understand, or remember. Tonight's recording is designed to remain gentle and steady. It isn't meant to guide you anywhere new. It isn't meant to hold your attention. If you choose to listen, that's fine. If your attention drifts away, that's just as fine. You don't need to follow every sentence. You don't need to notice when one thought ends and another begins. The words can remain in the background, moving at a calm and predictable pace. This is a quiet science story, shared slowly and without urgency. Everything mentioned is based on well-established scientific understanding. Nothing here is meant to surprise you. Nothing here requires effort. Your body already knows how to rest. Breathing continues on its own, without instruction. The surface beneath you is already providing support. There's nothing to adjust unless your body naturally wants to. You may notice the sound of the voice, or you may not. Either way, there's no need to check whether you're listening correctly. This recording doesn't build toward a conclusion. It doesn't depend on sequence. If you fall asleep partway through, nothing is missed. If you remain awake for a while, there's nothing you need to stay alert for. The pace will remain even. There will be no sudden changes in tone or volume, no sharp moments, no signals that something important is about to happen. As the minutes pass, the narration will continue in the same calm way. Ideas will be introduced softly, then repeated, then allowed to fade. Over time, the meaning may become less distinct. That's expected. You don't need to hold on to what you hear. You don't need to form images or keep track of details. The voice is here simply to provide a steady presence, something consistent enough that your mind doesn't need to stay active. If your thoughts wander, they can wander. If they slow down, they can slow down. There's no need to guide them in any direction. For now, it's enough to be here, resting, supported, breathing. The quiet science will unfold gently in the background, slowly, evenly, and you don't need to do anything at all. As you continue resting, there's no need to change anything unless your body naturally wants to. If you're already comfortable, you can let stillness remain. Breathing is happening on its own. You don't need to adjust it. You don't need to slow it down or make it deeper. Each breath arrives, then leaves without effort. There's no need to pay close attention to the breath. It doesn't require monitoring. It will continue whether or not it's noticed. The muscles in your face may already be softening. The small muscles around the eyes. The jaw, resting without being held in place. The tongue settling naturally without instruction. If any tension remains, it doesn't need to disappear. The body doesn't require complete relaxation in order to rest. It only needs time and a steady environment. The shoulders are supported by the surface beneath you. They don't need to be pulled downward. Gravity is already doing what it does, evenly and without urgency. Your arms are where they are. They don't need to be positioned in any particular way. There's no need for symmetry. They're simply present, resting along with the rest of the body. The chest rises and falls at a pace that suits you. That pace may change slightly from moment to moment. This happens automatically, without decision. Lower in the body, the abdomen moves gently with each breath. There's no need to hold it in, no need to control it. It responds naturally to pressure and release. Your legs are supported. The weight of them is already being carried. There's nothing to balance, nothing to keep upright. The feet don't need attention. They don't need to feel warm or light or heavy. They can simply exist at the far end of the body, quiet and unremarkable. As these sensations remain steady, the nervous system begins to notice the lack of demand. There's no task waiting to be completed, no response required, no signal that anything needs to change. Thoughts may still appear. They might be fragments of the day, images, unfinished sentences. They don't need to be followed. They don't need to be pushed away. They can pass through the mind the same way sounds pass through a quiet room, present for a moment, then gone. If your attention drifts away from these words, that's completely fine. The body doesn't need continuous input. It responds just as well to consistency and tone. The voice you're hearing isn't here to guide you somewhere specific. It's here to remain steady, allowing your internal systems to settle at their own pace. There's nowhere else to be, nothing else to prepare for. The night doesn't require readiness. You can continue resting exactly as you are. Breathing, supported, unchanged. The body already knows how to do this. As the body remains supported, attention often becomes less focused on individual sensations. Instead, it can begin to rest in a more general sense of steadiness. There isn't a clear boundary where this shift happens. It doesn't arrive all at once. It unfolds gradually, without announcement. In the natural world, many processes move this way. Not through sudden changes, but through slow transitions that are easy to overlook. Light fades across the evening without a precise moment when day becomes night. Sounds soften as activity decreases. Temperature in the environment changes gradually, not in steps, but along a gentle curve. These shifts don't require coordination. They don't respond to attention. They continue whether or not anyone is watching. The body is familiar with this kind of rhythm. It developed in environments shaped by repetition and slow variation rather than constant alertness. Because of that, predictable patterns tend to feel safe. They don't demand quick reactions. They don't signal urgency. Once the nervous system senses this lack of demand, it often begins to conserve energy. Muscle activity reduces. Mental activity becomes less organized. Not because anything is being forced, but because there's no reason to stay engaged. In science, many systems behave in the same way. Large-scale processes tend to move slowly, guided by steady influences rather than sudden impulses. Once set in motion, they continue along stable paths for long periods of time, sometimes for hours, sometimes for much longer. These processes don't require supervision. They don't need correction. They persist as long as the surrounding conditions remain consistent. When such systems are described scientifically, they're often explained using simple principles repeated across different contexts. The details can become complex, but the underlying patterns remain straightforward. This kind of repetition doesn't sharpen attention, it softens it. There's no need to visualize anything specific. If images appear on their own, they can pass naturally. What matters more is the sense of gradual movement, the feeling of things adjusting at a pace that doesn't rush toward an outcome. In this state, time can begin to feel less structured. Minutes don't need to be counted. There's no sequence to follow. The voice continues in the background, steady and even. Not to hold attention, but to provide a consistent reference point, something predictable enough that the mind doesn't need to stay alert. This is often when thinking becomes less verbal, less linear. Not because it stops entirely, but because it no longer needs to organize itself around tasks or decisions. Rest doesn't arrive in a single moment. It settles in layers. First in the body, then in the breath, and gradually in the space between thoughts. You don't need to notice when that happens. You don't need to mark the transition. The process continues on its own. As the body remains in this steady state, many internal processes continue adjusting quietly in the background. One of these processes involves body temperature. Body temperature is often thought of as something fixed, a single number, a stable point. In reality, it isn't constant. It changes slightly throughout the day and night, not in ways that are easy to feel, not in ways that demand attention, but in small, continuous adjustments that happen automatically. These changes are not decisions made by the body. They are not responses to thought or intention. They are part of a broader pattern of regulation that operates without awareness. The brain plays a role in coordinating this process, not by issuing commands, but by maintaining balance. This balance doesn't aim for stillness, it aims for stability across changing conditions. As the environment shifts from day to night, the body responds gradually. Light levels change, activity decreases, the need for alertness fades. Along with these changes, body temperature follows its own quiet rhythm. The shifts are small, often less than what can be noticed directly, but they are consistent. They don't happen suddenly. They don't signal themselves. They unfold slowly, over time. Because these changes are subtle, they are easy to overlook. Most of the time, the body adjusts without being noticed at all. This is intentional. Systems that require constant awareness tend to keep the brain active. Systems that work quietly allow attention to soften. Body temperature regulation belongs to the second category. It operates continuously, whether or not the body is at rest, whether or not the mind is focused on anything in particular. There is no need to monitor it, no need to influence it, no need to optimize it. The body already knows how to make these adjustments on its own. During periods of rest, many processes begin to shift toward conservation. Energy use changes. Muscle activity reduces. Internal rhythms slow slightly. Body temperature moves along with these changes, remaining within a narrow and safe range. Nothing about this process is dramatic. Nothing about it requires intervention. It is one of many signals that work together quietly, supporting the transition from wakefulness toward rest. These signals don't act independently. They overlap. They reinforce one another gently. When activity decreases, temperature adjusts. When temperature adjusts, the nervous system responds, and the cycle continues. This doesn't mean temperature causes sleep, and sleep doesn't cause temperature to change. They are part of the same larger pattern, unfolding together. Because this pattern repeats every day, the body is familiar with it. It doesn't need reminders. It doesn't need instructions. As night continues, these small adjustments remain in motion. They don't pause. They don't wait for awareness. They continue whether or not they are being heard about. The voice remains here simply to describe what is already happening, quietly, without urgency. You don't need to follow the details. You don't need to remember how this works. The process doesn't depend on understanding. It continues on its own. Behind many of the body's daily changes, there is a timing system that works quietly in the background. This system is often referred to as the circadian rhythm. It isn't a clock in the usual sense. It doesn't tick. It doesn't measure minutes or hours. Instead, it describes a repeating pattern, a tendency for certain processes to shift in similar ways each day. This rhythm influences when the body tends to feel alert and when it tends to feel ready for rest. Body temperature is one of the processes that follows this pattern. Across the course of a day, body temperature does not remain at exactly the same level. It rises slightly during periods of activity, and it gradually moves lower during the night. These changes are small. They stay within a narrow range. They are carefully regulated. Most of the time, they aren't noticed directly. The timing of these shifts is linked to the body's internal sense of day and night. Light exposure plays a role. So does regular activity. As daylight fades and the evening progresses, many systems begin to move in a similar direction. Alertness decreases, reaction speed slows, and body temperature begins its gradual nighttime trend. This change does not happen all at once. There is no single moment when it switches. It unfolds slowly, often over several hours. Because the shift is gradual, the nervous system doesn't treat it as an event. There is no signal that demands attention, no need to respond. Instead, the body adjusts continuously, making small corrections as conditions change. This rhythm repeats from one day to the next, not perfectly, but consistently enough that the body comes to expect it. When patterns repeat without surprise, the brain tends to reduce vigilance. It doesn't need to stay alert for sudden changes. It can allow activity to slow. Body temperature does not drop in order to force sleep, and sleep does not begin simply because temperature changes. Both are part of the same, larger process. They move together, guided by the same underlying timing. In scientific terms, this is described as coordination rather than control. One process does not command the other. They align. Because this alignment happens every night, it becomes familiar. The body doesn't need to interpret it. It simply follows the pattern it already knows. This is why there is no need to focus on temperature while resting. The adjustments are already underway. They don't depend on awareness. Even if attention drifts away from these words, the process continues. The rhythm does not require monitoring. It does not need to be optimized. It does not benefit from effort. On nights when sleep arrives quickly, these patterns are still present. On nights when sleep arrives more slowly, they continue just the same. Nothing has gone wrong. The body is not failing to follow its rhythm. It is simply moving at its own pace. As the night continues, temperature remains within its stable range. Small adjustments continue, quietly, without signal. The circadian rhythm does not rush. It does not hurry toward an outcome. It unfolds in the background, one gentle shift following another. And because this process is so familiar, the mind does not need to stay engaged with it. There is nothing here to solve, nothing to correct, nothing to watch closely. The rhythm continues on its own. As body temperature follows its daily rhythm, the way heat is distributed across the body also changes quietly. Not all parts of the body remain at the same temperature at the same time. Some areas hold heat more steadily, others change more easily. The center of the body tends to remain more stable. Areas closer to the surface adjust more freely. This is part of how the body manages heat without drawing attention to the process. As night approaches, blood flow patterns shift slightly. More blood moves toward the skin. Less remains concentrated deep within the body. This redistribution allows heat to be released gradually into the surrounding environment. The change is subtle. It doesn't feel like warmth spreading suddenly. It doesn't create a clear sensation that needs to be noticed. Often it happens without awareness at all. Hands and feet are among the areas where these changes are most noticeable when they are noticed. They tend to respond quickly to shifts in circulation. But even here, the adjustments remain gentle. Nothing about this process requires action. It is not something the body waits for permission to begin. It happens automatically, guided by the same internal timing that shapes other nightly changes. This redistribution of heat does not serve a single purpose. It supports balance across multiple systems at once. As heat moves toward the surface, internal conditions become slightly more stable for rest. The nervous system responds to this steadiness by reducing unnecessary activity. Again, this is not a signal. It is not an instruction. It is simply part of a larger pattern unfolding quietly in the background. These shifts do not need to be complete in order for rest to occur. They do not need to reach a specific point. They move within a range that is already safe and familiar to the body. On some nights, the changes feel easier to ignore. On other nights, they may be noticed briefly. Either way, the process continues. The body does not evaluate whether conditions are right. It adjusts continuously, responding to the environment and to its own internal state. There is no correct sensation to feel, no expected outcome. Heat redistribution is not something to track. It does not require attention. In scientific descriptions, these processes are often explained in detail, but for the body, they remain simple. Blood moves, heat moves, balance is maintained. These adjustments repeat night after night, not identically, but reliably enough that the body recognizes the pattern. Because of this familiarity, there is no urgency attached to the process. Nothing sudden happens. Nothing demands response. As these changes continue, the mind does not need to stay alert. There is no need to monitor internal states. The voice remains here only to describe what is already underway, quietly, without emphasis. You don't need to remember where heat moves. You don't need to picture circulation or pathways. The details are not important for rest. What matters is that the process continues on its own, steady, predictable. And as it does, attention can soften further without needing to follow the explanation. By now, there is no need to keep track of what has already been said. Nothing here depends on remembering details. Nothing is building toward a conclusion. The processes being described continue whether or not they are followed. Body temperature continues adjusting quietly. The daily rhythm remains in place. Heat redistribution continues at its own pace. These changes do not speed up. They do not pause. They do not wait for attention. They are already underway. The repetition, you may notice, is intentional. When information stops changing, the brain no longer needs to stay alert. It can remain open without monitoring for what comes next. At this point, there is no advantage in listening closely. The voice does not begin to explain anything new. It does not introduce new ideas. Words may still be heard, but they don't need to be interpreted. They can pass through without forming clear thoughts. The body remains supported. Breathing continues at its own pace. Nothing in the environment has shifted suddenly. There is no signal that something important is about to happen. The same ideas return gently, not to add meaning, but to maintain steadiness. Temperature continues to move within its familiar range. The rhythm that guides it remains unchanged. The nervous system continues responding in the same gradual way. These processes do not require supervision. They do not benefit from effort. They do not change when they are not observed. This is a point of permission. Permission to stop following sentences. Permission to let the voice become part of the background. Permission to allow awareness to soften. If sleep arrives now, nothing is missed. The story does not progress forward in the way stories usually do. It does not reach an ending. The patterns being described repeat. They continue. If awareness fades, it fades naturally. If it returns briefly later, it can drift again just as easily. There is no correct way to experience this moment. Some nights, rest arrives quickly. Other nights, it arrives in stages. Both are normal. The body does not need instruction. The mind does not need reassurance. The steady rhythm is enough. From here on, the information remains low. No new ideas will appear. Nothing will need to be understood. The voice remains consistent. The tone does not change. There is nothing to prepare for. Everything that matters is already in motion. The same processes continue without change. Body temperature remains within its familiar range. It adjusts gradually, as it always does. Nothing about it becomes more urgent as time passes. The rhythm that guides these changes does not shift direction. It does not speed up. It does not slow down suddenly. It continues at the same steady pace. Heat continues to move gently through the body, not toward a goal, not toward an endpoint, simply following the conditions that are already in place. There is no moment when this process needs to be completed, no signal that it has reached a correct state. It does not finish. It continues. The nervous system responds to this steadiness by reducing activity that is no longer needed. There is no instruction involved, no decision being made. This response happens quietly, the same way it has on countless nights before. Breathing continues on its own. The rhythm may change slightly, then change back again. These small variations do not matter. They are part of the same pattern. The body remains supported. The surface beneath you does not shift. Nothing needs to be held in place. As the minutes pass, there is less need for words to carry meaning. They can remain as sound, even, predictable. There is no need to follow the structure of sentences, no need to notice where one idea ends and another begins. Repetition is not here to reinforce information. It is here to remove the need for attention. When the brain recognizes that nothing new is arriving, it no longer needs to stay alert. It can remain open without monitoring. The same phrases may return, the same ideas may be restated, not to clarify, not to explain, simply to remain steady. Temperature continues adjusting quietly. The rhythm remains unchanged. Heat continues to redistribute in the same gentle way. Nothing about these processes depends on awareness. They do not pause when attention drifts. They do not change when they are not noticed. If thoughts appear, they can pass. If they dissolve into fragments, that is fine. There is no need to gather them into anything complete. The voice continues at the same level, the same pace, the same tone. It does not signal progress. It does not move toward a conclusion. Time may begin to feel less distinct. Moments may blend together. Pauses may feel longer. There is no reason to mark this shift. The night does not require structure. It does not require tracking. The processes being described are not moving toward an outcome. They repeat. They continue. And as they do, attention can remain soft, without effort. Nothing needs to change. These same patterns do not belong to this night alone. They repeat across many nights, quietly, without variation that needs to be noticed. Body temperature follows its familiar rhythm again and again, not perfectly, but reliably enough that the body does not need to question it. Some nights feel different from others, but the underlying processes remain the same. They are not concerned with how quickly rest arrives. They are not affected by whether sleep feels deep or light. They continue whether sleep comes early or late. This repetition across time is part of what makes the process stable. When something happens often enough, the body stops treating it as an event. It becomes background. Night after night, small adjustments unfold in similar ways. They do not require preparation. They do not require correction. The body does not review the day before, allowing these processes to begin. It does not compare one night to another. It simply follows the same general pattern it has followed before. Over long periods of time, this consistency matters more than precision. The rhythm does not need to be exact in order to be effective. It only needs to continue. This is why there is no need to evaluate how rest feels in any given moment. There is no need to judge whether the body is doing something right. The system does not work on a single night basis. It unfolds across weeks, across months, across years. Each night is just one instance within a much larger sequence. When viewed this way, there is no urgency attached to the present moment. Nothing is being decided tonight. The body is not trying to achieve a particular outcome before morning. It is simply moving through another familiar cycle. Temperature continues adjusting in the same quiet way it always has. The rhythm that guides it remains unchanged by individual experiences. The nervous system responds to this long-term consistency by reducing vigilance. It does not need to stay alert for novelty. Nothing here is new. Because of that, attention does not need to remain sharp. There is no advantage in staying awake to observe the process. It will continue whether or not it is noticed. As this sense of duration settles in, details become less important. The exact wording no longer matters. The specific ideas no longer need to be followed. What remains is a general sense of continuity, of processes unfolding without interruption. Night after night, the same gentle adjustments take place. And because they belong to a timescale much larger than this moment, there is no reason to stay engaged with them now. They can continue on their own. As the minutes pass, there is less need for words to carry information. They can remain as sound. Moving slowly, at a steady pace, there is nothing left to explain. The processes described earlier continue without change. Body temperature continues adjusting quietly. The rhythm remains the same. Nothing shifts direction. There is no need to follow the voice as it moves. No need to notice where one sentence ends and another begins. Words may blur together. Pauses may feel longer. Time may feel less distinct. This is not something that needs to be noticed closely. It can happen without awareness. The body does not need instruction now. It already knows how to remain still. It already knows how to rest. Breathing continues without being guided. The pace may change slightly, then return. The surface beneath you remains supportive. Nothing needs to be held in place. Nothing needs to be adjusted. Sound continues in the background. It does not signal anything new. It does not ask for attention. If thoughts appear, they do not need to form complete ideas. They can arrive as fragments, then pass. There is no need to gather them into meaning. The same phrases may return, not to explain, not to clarify, only to maintain rhythm. The environment remains quiet and unchanged. The voice does not increase or decrease in urgency. There are no shifts in tone. Nothing here depends on an outcome. If sleep arrives, it can arrive quietly. If it does not, there is no problem. The process does not measure success. It does not keep track. The mind does not need to hold on to anything that has been said. There is nothing to remember, nothing to complete. As this continues, attention can soften further, without effort, without direction. The words are no longer carrying meaning. They are only carrying steadiness. That steadiness is enough. The rhythm continues. Nothing shifts. Nothing resolves. The same steady patterns remain in place. Body temperature continues adjusting quietly. The rhythm that guides it does not change. Heat continues moving gently without interruption. There is no signal marking the passage of time, no clear boundary between one moment and the next. The voice remains present, but it does not ask to be followed. Words arrive, then fade. Sentences do not need to be completed. The space between them is enough. Breathing continues on its own. There is no need to notice it. The body remains supported. Nothing needs to be held. Nothing needs to be corrected. If sleep has already arrived, the sound continues without needing to be heard. If awareness returns briefly, it can drift again just as easily. Nothing here depends on attention. The processes being described do not change when they are not observed. They do not slow down. They do not speed up. They continue at the same pace they always have. There is no conclusion waiting, no final thought to reach. The night does not move toward an ending. It simply unfolds. The repetition remains gentle. The tone remains even. There is no reason to stay awake for what comes next. The words no longer carry information. They only carry rhythm. That rhythm does not need to be understood. It can remain quietly in the background, like distant motion, like slow cycles that do not announce themselves. Nothing more is required. The night continues. The motion continues. And the quiet remains.